Well, today I found the perfect piece of wood that I'm going to use in a project, or I think I'm going to use. And I'm going to go through, I want to show you exactly what you need to prep your wood, to break down your wood before you even start doing any woodworking project. And this, it's just like building a house. If you do the right things in the foundation, the rest of the house comes together all nice and square. And the same is true with woodworking. If you do the prep work beforehand, everything that you do later on is going to work out. So let's jump in and get started here. So here's the perfect piece of wood that I have, and you can see that it looks terrible on this side. This side is not quite as bad. There's not quite as much markings on it. Now, as it turns out, I purchased this from a friend of mine who was moving out of town, and he wanted to get rid of all of his wood. And this is birch, which I don't often get a chance to work with. Now, this wood had lived outside for a couple of seasons, and you can see that it got water. It's stained and just pretty ugly looking, but there's some other things. You can see that it's flat on one side, it's live edge on the other, and if you look at the far end, it's live edge on both sides because, as we all know, trees get narrower as they grow up. So this is the bottom of the tree, and that's where it grew up. So all of these things, I'm going to take all of these things into account as I go along here. So the first thing we do when we pick out a project that we want to make and we start looking at the wood we're going to use, the first thing we want to find out about the wood is what's the moisture content of the wood. And generally speaking, the ideal content of moisture content is around 10%. And there's basically two kinds of moisture meters that you can get. Some with a pin, and this is a pinned one, and this one, which is a pinless. Now, the pinless will cost you a little bit more, but in my opinion, they're well worth it, because when you go to a lumber store, you don't have to ask if you can check the moisture content of the wood. If you have a pinned meter, you'll want to ask them if you can test the moisture of the wood, because a lot of times they're not going to want you poking holes. They don't want everybody coming in and poking holes in their wood, and you don't want to buy wood with holes poked in it. So that's why these pinless ones are ideal. So I've already tested this one, and it's 10.6, so it's perfect. So that's the first step. The next thing we're going to do is start looking at how we're going to cut this. Now, one of the things that you don't get told when you're purchasing wood, often they will tell you that the wood is kiln dried. What they don't tell you is that it's partially kiln dried, and depending on the lumber and where you're buying it, how long it sat in the lumber store, whether it's inside or outside, all of those are variants on what the moisture content is. Now, when you get it home, if you buy something that they say is kiln dried, you bring it home and you look at it 2 or 3 weeks later or a month later and you find that it's warped. What you did was you bought wood that it may have been kiln dried, but it wasn't totally kiln dried, and the last little bit, that wood has warped. And this is a piece that's 8 feet long, and you can see it's got quite a warp on it. Now, in the past, another thing that I learned the hard way, I would take this wood and run it through my planer and make it flat, because the first thing we have to do with any board that we bring home, we need to make sure one face side is flat. But here's the problem. With wood that is warped, if we were to try and run this through a jointer to get it flat, what happens? We're going to end up with wood that is wedge shaped. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So what I have here in front is another piece of wood that's almost perfectly flat. And when I put this down and make this as flat as I can, I'm actually going to clamp that at this end because I can't hold it down and do some marking. What happens in an ideal world, if you were to run this through a planer, look at what happens. The wood starts out here. So maybe we're going to plane this top off here. So we start off really nice here. We're only taking off 1/4 of an inch. But as we go down, because the wood is warping, look at all the wood that we're taking off because it's flipped up here. Now that line underneath there, that is perfectly flat. But look at what we end up with, a 1/4 inch of wood here and 3/4 inch down at the other end. And that's just a waste of wood. So we don't want to waste wood. So here's how we solve that. So what I can do to save some of this wood, because somebody who cut this wood knew what they were doing. And if you look here, there's no checking, and this wood has been very wet and very dry, and somebody has end sealed this wood at some point. And when you end seal wood, it means that the moisture is forced to go out the sides, and when it does that, it goes out slowly, because if you don't end seal wood, all of the moisture will run out the bottom very quickly, and that's why the ends of boards check, is because the moisture is allowed to go out the bottoms rather than sort of forced out the side. When it goes out slowly out the sides, then the wood often does not check. So I don't have to cut off the bottom of this. I can take a chunk of wood, and I've actually got it marked right over here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to cut this piece because I've already checked, and this piece of wood in here just by itself is actually quite flat, and I can save a lot of that wood, because if I only need to plane or joint this much of it, it means that I can get a good 3/4 inch all the way along. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a chop saw or a miter saw, and you can put an 8-foot board on your workstation using your chop saw, then go ahead and do that. I don't have that, so I'm doing this by hand on my table. But what I'm using here is some rigid foam that I get from the lumber store, and I use it. It's rigid, it's hard, and I use it as a base so that I don't cut into my workbench. Okay, so there's my little piece of wood, and there's still a little bit of movement in it, but it's cupped like this. And when we take this to the jointer, this is the face side that I want to look at. You can see that there's quite a difference here, but this is the side that I think there may be some spalting in that I want to have a look at. So that's good, because when you take this to a jointer to plane this down, you want the cup side down. So when I take it to the jointer, I'm going to be putting it on like that. Now, the next thing that I need to do before I take it to the jointer is, you can't really see, but I can, on top here, you can see that there's a bunch of sawdust and I don't know what. People might have walked on this board, I don't know. But the thing that we always do, and it doesn't matter where the lumber comes from, because people walk on lumber all over the place, and when they do that, they put little rocks and pebbles and gravel, they grind that into the wood, and when we go to joint that, what happens is it pits the blades and gives us these little lines in our jointer and planer blades. So the next thing I always do, no matter where the wood comes from, I take a stiff wire brush and I brush the wood, and you can actually see, I'll show you what I'm getting off of it here. Look at what I'm getting off of it, and I've just started. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Now, some people sand. I don't like to use sandpaper, because the sandpaper that I would want to use on this would be 60 grit, and it's going to put little swirl marks too deep into the wood. It's going to be too hard to get out. So that's why I like to use a wire brush. It gets rid of 99% of the stuff in the wood, and it still makes it easy to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll go over to the jointer. So look at the little treasure I found in there when I was brushing the top off. Somebody has driven a nail in there. I would never put a nail in wood like that. And I checked the other side, it doesn't come through, so it's just in that one side, but I wanted to make sure that was. So my metal detector, yep, it's definitely steel. So that's the first thing I need to do, is to dig that out. Then we're going to go over to the jointer. So there's no real easy way of getting nails out, but if you look closely, you'll see a little point sticking out, because what I did, I'm going to flip this board over, because what I did was find exactly the coordinates of this nail, and I drove a little finishing nail from underneath. Let me show you what that looks like. And there's that finishing nail going through. I'm going to hit it one more time here just so you can see. And I'll flip it back over. And there you can see it's protruding now, but it's out now. It's pushed the nail far enough out that I think I can get something underneath it and pull that out. So that's the little trick that I use to try and get that nail out of there, rather than digging and gouging all the wood out here. So as I'm digging in, this is getting stranger and stranger. This is not a nail in here. I think this is a bullet, because I'm pretty sure that this is lead. It's very, look at, I can squeeze it with pliers. Look at that. You can't do that with a nail head. I wonder, that's got to be a bullet that was in there. Look at that. Well, I've heard of people digging bullets out of wood, but I've never done one before. But this is definitely lead in here. And that's why I didn't go through, because it's only penetrated so far. Isn't that interesting? I'm still going to have to dig it out. It's not coming out. Yeah, I'm just going to keep working at it here, because I have to get that out of there. Okay, one more time. It's still, it looks like the whole thing, oh, there it is. Look at that. You know what that is? That looks like a 22 shell. I would say that that's a 22 shell that somebody shot my wood with. So while I was at it, I had a close look at this bullet, and I'm pretty confident that that was at one point a 22, the slug from a 22 bullet. I took and counted the rings, and I was able to do that from here all the way to the live edge, because there was one live edge here, and I counted 62 rings. So this bullet was embedded in this tree 62 years ago, and if you look closely, you'll see that there's some anomaly in the tree here way back when, and you can see there's a little bit of a circular area here, and that is all part of what happened. Probably maybe some lead bleed or something in there, I don't know, but you can see where that is quite visible now. So I know this tree was harvested on the west coast of North America. I know that birch trees are not native there, so this had to have been planted by somebody probably 70 or 80 years ago, and that's where that bullet ended up, somehow in that tree. Okay, now I've moved over to the jointer, as you can see. Now I'm going to do two things. I'm going to give a flat face, and I'm going to use the flat face to give me a flat edge. So I'll have one flat face and one flat edge. I'm not going to show you the jointing process, because you've seen people use the jointer, so I'm just going to go ahead and make these cuts. Well, that completes my prepared wood. It's all ready to go. So I started off with jointing that face side. I used the face side to give me a nice face edge. So now I've got a 90-degree angle. Both are straight and flat. Then I was able to plane the board, because I now had a flat face of that. The next thing I could do would be to cut off this live edge that I'm not going to use anyway, but that's the proper way of prepping a board. And now that I know what that board looks like, I'm not really happy. There's a little bit of staining on there, but I'm not going to use that side. That's the side I'm going to use. It's fresh, clean birch, and that's kind of what I was looking for originally. Anyway, I just wanted to see what that looked like. So the next thing I need to do is the same thing with this board, and I'll do the same thing. I'll cut the lengths that I need so that I sort of avoid that warping on there, and especially this area down here. I don't want to waste any wood down here, so again I'll be cutting whatever lengths I need here so that I don't waste this live edge, which is just, in this case, is going to be waste wood anyway. Now if you want to see some lovely spalted wood, I cut some on the bandsaw in a previous video, and I love working with spalted wood, but this one isn't one of them. So if you want to see what spalted wood is, I'll put that link up there. You'll be able to go and have a look at that. And now I can get on with my build, and you'll see that coming up in the future. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web, and hopefully your wood is bullet free.